Hey everybody, Adam Savage here. I am at the Lucasfilm's Letterman complex in the Presidio in San Francisco, and I have come across this building from AI, and I thought I'd take you a little bit down memory lane because AI was an absolutely massive production at ILM with some clearly gargantuan models. And very specifically, this is part of a sequence in AI that goes forward into the future, and you see New York City, where the water level in New York City is like 60 feet up, like 6 stories. So most of New York is submerged, and the buildings that remain are slowly rotting. This was the charge from the art department. And then the art department designed some buildings like this. And my friend Aaron Hay, Aaron and I used to work together as model makers at ILM. And Aaron had a team building the form of this building with all the floors, all the windows, etc. And then those buildings would come to me and my team, and we would basically carve out giant chunks of them. Now, it wasn't quite that perfect delineation of skills, because when Aaron put this building together, he had to put it together with all the broken glass. So we made specific adjustable, movable, laser cut files of broken glass. And then, when you do a piece like this, there's no efficiency to be found. You kind of have to add every single detail. Nonetheless, we were able to find some efficiencies. I actually drove past a construction site in the East Bay almost every day, and I was getting clues and hints and aesthetic guidance from watching this building get built in order to destroy the buildings that I was working on. And one of the key pieces of technology I came up with was a concrete girder with rebar inside. And so if you look at this girder here, you can see that it's got wires sticking out of it like you see in earthquake footage. And the way this worked is I made a laser cut mold that held 6 pieces of soft plant wire in a grid, and then you poured gray plaster around them, pulled it out, and when you broke it, it would break like this. So we made hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these girders and attached them in where the girders would go, and then twisted the wires so they looked all excellent. Our reference material for this discussion was actually a huge and very upsetting book of pictures of the Kobe earthquake. Buildings doing things you never imagined buildings could do. There are 2 buildings in the Kobe earthquake where one floor collapsed, but the rest of the building didn't. I'll get back to some of the efficiencies we found. You can see in the close-up shots some of the broken wall sections. Those were laser cut files. The Venetian blinds were actually a digital file which was etched in brass. We made thousands of them, painted them 3 different colors. I think there was a taupe, a white, and a gray. And when you do that, you paint some taupe, some white, some gray, and you distribute them, you end up getting this perfect look of an endless number of details that would almost be impossible for humans to assemble. We spent, I think, 7 months doing all the broken buildings from that sequence in New York. It's really one of the most fun full executions I got to do at Lucasfilm, because this is literally what 8-year-old me thought working at a model shop was going to be like tearing chunks out of buildings and making them look really cool. I have to say, coming back to this and getting some close-up looks at the work is bringing me right back to the really fun camaraderie of how delightful it was to execute such a crazy detailed model, and then to see it on screen. The broken buildings they show all that money is on the screen when you see the film. It's really gorgeous. Dude. Yeah. Tons of etched brass, tons of custom laser cut files, tons of, it's really cool to see it again. Oh, I forgot there's furniture too, little desks. I can't remember what scale this must be. What would a human be, like an inch tall? So that's like 1/72nd scale. We got some train model furniture and made castings of those and populated them around this. Yeah, they got some folding tables and stuff. This is one of those things where everyone jumps in to do the big gestures. And then once they're all done, everyone kind of separates and each person sort of grabs a little fiefdom and adds their detailing. That tended to be the way that sort of work would shake out on a job like this. Oh, It's another model from AI. I should actually give a little bit of a latter preamble because I didn't tell you how important AI was to me. AI is a movie by Steven Spielberg, which if you haven't watched it, you should. If you watched it when it came out and you didn't love it, you should watch it again because it's way better than you remember. But AI started out as a Stanley Kubrick project. In the early 90s, I remember hearing from someone who worked with Dennis Muren that he had been talking to Kubrick about a film that involved a submerged New York. And I had further heard that at that point, Muren had told Kubrick that the stuff he wanted to do was still not really feasible until digital technology was better. And then I heard another story about AI in the mid-90s. So in the late 90s, when this job comes to ILM, I can't even describe how excited I was. To me, this was like getting to work on a Blade Runner. And I'd already been following stories about this film for like 8 years. So to get to execute on it was a crazy treat. This was a set that I supervised from start to finish. This came late in the production. My supervisors were Steve Gawley and Ben Nichols. Ben was specifically managing the underwater sequence. And this is part of the fairyland underwater where the boy sinks at a certain point. You see all of these pieces of the submerged fairyland. And so the charge was build a carousel about this big. I had some drawings from the art department, but more reference than drawings. This is a quick and dirty build. They wanted this executed in something like, I think 2 or 3 weeks. It might have been 2. So I did a ton of laser cutting. Much of the structure here of the internal middle, the floorboards, the designs and the little squiggles, all of this was laser cut in 1/4-inch plywood and 1/8-inch acrylic to make it very fast to assemble. At the same time, from the sculpting department, we had 3 of these donkeys made, 3 or 2. We had multiples, and then they were cast. I believe Michael Steffi did the machining on the carousel rods, which are actually brass, to give them a real spiral to them. And if you look up in the rafters, you see that I even replicated the gearing mechanics, because a carousel like this is driven by a giant central motor that not only spins the whole thing, but that motor has a couple of outputs that come out to rods that make all of the animals go up and down. It all happens from a single motor. And so I was just looking at the central mass that is the motor. It didn't have to look like a motor, it just had to look like something. And I totally remember building that. Probably took like 2 hours. I want to point out some little efficiencies that are remarkable. We cast the light bulbs, we cast them in multiple colors, but we also cast them in whole and broken. So these aren't little bulbs that we broke. They're little cast clear resin bulbs that were made to be broken, and we cast them in multiple different colors and populated the various signage with them. This was absolutely one of the builds where I was sad that I didn't get to paint it, because this kind of weathering is some of the most fun to paint. And the painting department on AI, there are some other models that show you in some B-roll, had a tremendous party of all the mold and the lichen and the rotting and the ways in which things deteriorate. These jobs are fun too, because art department often supplies you with fabulous reference material of things like wood rotting underwater and stuff like that. Yeah, and by the way, you might not recognize this from the film because it was never filmed. Just after I completed it, just after it was painted and ready to go to set, it would have needed one extra thing in its shot, which was some seaweed. And the seaweed was digital. And apparently Steven Spielberg and Dennis Muren were horse trading things that they could do. And Dennis was like, you can have the carousel with the flowing seaweed, but then you can't afford this other sequence that you really want. And Spielberg was like, I really want that sequence, so let's get rid of the carousel and I don't have to pay for the digital seaweed. So sadly, this model, while perfectly completed, was never actually filmed. I love coming to Lucasfilm and seeing these pieces. They're always moved into different places, and sometimes you got to crouch to see them. But we'll be standing up in a second, and I'll be talking to David Nakabayashi, aka Nak, who was the VFX art director on AI. All right, Nak, Aaron, let's talk about AI. We were just talking off camera that it doesn't feel like it has been the 6 years since we made that movie.
It doesn't feel like that at all.
No.
It feels like it just happened.
I remember this. It was a huge production. It took over the whole model shop for the better part of a year.
Right. It was on the heels of episode 1, right?
Right.
Which was another kind of hybrid of practical visual effects, photochemical era, going into digital effects, because there weren't enough CG artists at the time.
Was that really part of the holdup?
That was part of the holdup. So that was, and then Dennis, who is the lead on AI, Dennis Murin, he came in and said, well, we kind of should take what we just learned off of episode 1 and just use this to get everything done. Because ILM was exploding at the time. They were having, we went from 1 show, 2 shows to like 5 or 6 at a time. And it was just San Francisco. It wasn't this global effort that we have now. Yeah.
I remember hearing, I was saying this earlier, that I remember hearing stories about Dennis talking to Stanley Kubrick about this movie and saying it wasn't going to be possible until CG gets better.
Right. He was definitely saying that. I was in the office when they got the phone call.
What?
Yeah, I was in the, we had a little storyboard area, and I had my desk set up. So I was working as, the art director for episode 1, Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
And Ned goes, Dennis, you need to take this call. And it was like, oh, Stanley Kubrick's on the phone. And I was like, what? Stanley Kubrick? And, I'm a big Kubrick fan.
Oh, yeah.
We all are. And so I heard a little bit, and all I heard was this, yes, and then the door closed. So I was like, okay, I got enough. And I think I went back to the apartment, and I said, Stanley Kubrick just called Dennis Murin or something like that. And then it just turned into like they went over there. I think it was a Thanksgiving. I think that he was invited to Thanksgiving with Kubrick at the time. And they talked about, I believe it was AI, because Stanley Kubrick had always wanted to do a tentpole scale film.
Amazing.
Because he'd done so much, and why not? Could do a blockbuster.
Yeah.
Because, at that point, Spielberg, Lucas's, everybody else was making these types of films. And I think he wanted to get his...
I think people are surprised. They think of Kubrick as such an auteur, but he loved those movies that Spielberg and Lucas and all those guys were turning out.
Yeah, well, Eraserhead's his favorite film. So it's like that's what he told David Lynch at one point. It's like, that's my favorite film.
Still the most disturbing animatronic ever built?
Ever.
Built? It's full, no question at all.
Yeah. Very strange.
So tell me your first intersection with AI, Aaron.
My first experience, it was actually the first experience I had with a film that was so locked down with secrecy. You were hearing stories about, the scripts where only one person was allowed in the room at a time. They had to sign, away their life to even look at the script. And then it was the first film that I worked on at the time as a junior concept artist. And it was this thing where it was a crash course in just every single technique that ILM was combining together at the time. And so much of it was about making sure the scale worked.
Right.
Nock, who was the visual effects art director, would come in and he put a big sign up on our cubicles where we were all working, because there was a bunch of junior artists there working. And it said scale, exclamation point, like 3 exclamation points. And he would just come in like a teacher, teaching you Latin on the chalkboard. He would just pound the sign that said scale.
1/4-inch scale,
because it had
5th scale.
And we were working in CG. We were working like full size. We went down to LA a couple times to work on some of the full size sets. And then, or just to be in contact with what they were shooting on set. And so it was CG and model shop, and was it 1/4 scale? Was it what? And just made sure that the scale had to work across all those disciplines.
Right.
And that was super daunting as a new person coming into the whole process.
Yeah, it was another thing too that our department, really picked up from episode 1. Like there were so many sets and so many miniatures that had to be built physically.
Yeah.
Right. But then it got crossed over into the digital realm, and there was no point of reference. So that's why, as most films are, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why you have, go buy some toys, put them in the shot, and it works,
Yeah.
And then we would say, well, how do we do that? And I was like, well, let's go back to old school set design and just set a standard for how big of a nut and a bolt looks like.
Oh,
and then that crosses over. And then also it's expedited the builds. Like if you have, a model builder has an elevation as opposed to a beautiful piece of concept art, there's a little bit less interpretation, it's just, it's the art director's fault. At that point, something doesn't work.
I remember model makers, and really, I was very specific about this. Is like there were things that got built in scale that I wanted to build, and I'd be like, I want to make a milk jug, Steve. I remember telling Steve Gawley, like, hey, you need a milk jug, I'm gonna make it for you, okay? And he's like, I don't know if we have time. I'm like, I'm gonna go in 40 minutes for lunch, man. I just gotta make this milk. I still have castings of that milk jug I made.
That's awesome. Well, we're big fans of Steve Gawley.
Yeah.
We're also big fans of model makers because every time we would pass off a drawing or a piece of artwork, it just got so much better than the drawing.
So you brought out one of the carousel drawings, and
I did.
I was just talking about it on camera, and I was saying that like this was a quick and dirty. I seem to remember this was brought to me of like, hey, can you execute this in 3 weeks flat?
Yeah, I think this was actually a shot that was taken out of.
Oh no, I know the horse trading for
and it was
seaweed,
which actually was great because the seaweed really believable.
The seaweed looked incredible.
If you looked at the shot now, it's like if they didn't have the seaweed, it looked like a dry for wet set because it was so.
No, it was amazing.
It was a nice touch,
But
and the fish and things like that cost a lot of money.
I just had no idea how expensive the seaweed was.
So unfortunately, the carousel shot was cut because it was in sequence to the arrival of the underwater Coney Island set, which obviously there was a catastrophe on Earth and the tides raised.
I still am moved. I'm still moved by that light moving across the set, the underwater, seeing the bits.
It was
the copper tone,
the funiculars.
It was a perfect setting for setting up the sadness of what has happened to humanity, but there was still Stanley Kubrick humanity there. That strange, what am I looking at? I'm feeling something here,
What was most fun for the modelers was that there was so much to be built. Art department gave us lots of extra room to play.
Right.
Like we filled those buildings with laser cut colored acrylic just to add visual depth to it. And you guys were like, hey, whatever works.
Right. The first lesson in filming is don't do this alone, right? Exactly. And lean on your collaborators, lean on Island Model Shop to bring a whole nother level to what the idea was.
Well, I mean, and talk about the work Melanie Wallace and her team did on the weathering on all of these buildings.
Yeah,
just
phenomenal.
So, and I love watching the painters develop a palette and a set of procedures.
Right. And it doesn't look like anything in broad daylight.
Yeah.
But on camera and smoke and lighting and the camera moving, it's perfect.
Yeah.
It's an aged underwater theme park that has algae and life to it that's taken on its own thing. It's like the Titanic, it just tells a whole nother story of lost humanity, here.
And it really is that moment when the sadness, you're right, takes over the film, that beautiful phrase.
Yeah.
There was what was great about getting to work with the model shop on that project too was so much of the terminology that's used in CG and other techniques is born out of the model shop era. That if you need to say, we'll flock that or do this or that, for a CG term, it's all goes back to terminology that kind of was
from physical
model building. That it was good for us to get that kind of crash course working with the model shop of all the terminology and
Yeah. So this is actually the quick sketch that Christian Alsman put together. Again, we're working on scale and how does this translate?
And I think this was most of what I had to build from.
I think it was all you had, other than you. So this was just a quick basic shape, and it was based off of some carousel research through the production designer, and also some sketches. From what I remember, our camera move went through the carousel, so we saw the horses and the animals in profile. And so you got even more, kind of these life forms coming in the camera and everything else. And then there was, I think, a B shot that was wider. And I think they axed those because the budget had to start getting squeezed for, we're going to put fish in here. We didn't budget fish. Seaweed in the current, kelp on the seagrass, which actually brought a lot of life to the shot and believability. And if you look at the actual composite, it's like, that looks like CG kelp or CG seagrass, but it totally works.
Well, I remember your whole thing about in the volumetric light from the amphibicopter that's going through a lot of these amusement park things. You were making sure they added plankton seen through that cone of light, so that it didn't look like just a perfect light cone. That there was stuff, particulate going through there.
And in early computer graphics, that had to be written. Now it's put some dirt in there, you know, put some air. But that was a real big sell, was particulate in the lights, because that's, you know, it's in the research, it's in the scuba stuff.
Was there something as a young concept designer on your first big film something that you were so excited to get to design?
So we all, at one point or another, we all took a pass at working on the Specialist, which was the evolved robotic form that kind of goes, they go and they excavate David many, many years in the future. And it was such an enigma of what that was going to be and how it was going to behave that everyone sort of took a pass at that at some point. And that was always a fun exploration.
I have to say, when I saw the movie when it came out, and that voiceover, Ben Kingsley says, "In 5,000 years past," in the theater I was watching it and everyone laughed. Like that line came off ridiculous. I watched it again a couple of years ago, not the same at all. Like I find the film way more moving now than when I first saw it.
Yeah, same. When you saw it in the theater, you had such high expectations, right? And then I think the high expectations came later when I saw it like the third time when I was older. I was like, this is a really moving story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always submitted that when your toy tells you to run, it's the worst thing you can possibly imagine.
You run. You do what your toy tells you to do, right?
Being folks who love movies, I feel like AI was the special occasion that I was thinking it might be when it first got to ILM. It really feels like a rarity in filmmaking where so many big sets were done practically.
Yeah, I agree. And it was just kind of incredible being in the mix of it and just seeing everything happen, and then working with the model shop and what they came up with. You know, Lauren Peterson suctioning trash bags and cracks to diffuse light to make it look like ice was just like, what? How does that work?
There was at least a month where I kept on trying to get the gig to make a garbage truck. We needed an overturned garbage truck on the
for the
set.
for the Copperstone set.
I never got to build the garbage truck.
I remember driving over with Charlie Bailey to Burger Bay, and we were trying to, he's like, oh, you did this concept? And it was the painting of them drifting by the Coppertone billboard. Yeah. And he's like, all right, come with me. And he took me over to the warehouse, and there was just like tons of thrown out model stuff. Like and he's like, see if you can pick stuff out of here. Help me pick stuff out of here that would look like something in there. Amazing. And that was just kid in a candy store, you know? So going through all this, you know, detritus of beautiful model kits, and like, oh, wow, that's
cast off and no longer necessary.
Island of misfit toys kind of thing. So,
I really appreciate you guys chatting about the film. I'm so proud to have worked on it, and I love working with you guys on it.
Likewise.
It's amazing.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. When I was a young model maker, I was always freelance. And when you're freelance, one of the best ways to get work is to draw attention to yourself, both for what you can do and also how you do it. And one of the ways I drew attention to myself was with my toolboxes. They were moderately absurd. Aluminum doctor's bags sitting on scissor lifts so I could rise them up to the level of my workbench and give me access to every tool I needed, hundreds and hundreds of them. This is a poster I drew a bunch of years ago of these toolboxes, and it includes a list of every last thing that was in here, numbering thousands and thousands of dollars. For the first time ever, we're making these available to you, signed. And you can get yours over at adamsavage.com. See you guys there.